All right, we're now going to move on to the question of causation. This is really the last of the big topics that we're covering in this course, and we'll do some of it this week and some of it will carry over until next week. We've talked already about how beliefs about causation are fundamental to decision making. So when we make a decision, we're choosing from a range of alternatives to find one that we believe will have the best consequences. And what we really mean when we say we believe an action or a decision will have the best consequences is we mean it will cause the best consequences to come about. It may not be the only cause, but it's a desirable or necessary causal factor. So we might decide that we want to start some kind of online shop. We have a number of different formats that we're examining. We want to choose the one that will be the most profitable or produce the best sales or achieve some other business goal. Now, we actually tend not to use the word cause very often in these situations. We use terminology like lead to, enhance, increase, improve, transform, and so on. There's lots of other words we use. I think partly because we don't want to find ourselves in a position of making a prediction that about a cause that turns out not to be the case, but also in many common situations the decision that we're making is really just part of the story. We're making a decision to do so. If you take the online shop example, we might need to make a decision about the layout and color scheme and so on for the website. That's a causal factor in the success of the business, but it's certainly unlikely to be the only one. There'll be lots of other factors that impinge on the success. But underlying this is cause and effect. Now, we're encouraged, when we're making decisions, this has been a theme in the course, to get the best available evidence, which often means getting multiple sources of evidence. And we've learned a few ways of aggregating these. So we've, in the last few lectures, we've been looking at Bayesian updating as a means of aggregation. That, if you like to think of it in this way, is like the mathematically correct way to do it. But there are other techniques that we've covered at different points in the class that can be used to aggregate evidence, particularly evidence from experts and stakeholders. So things like multi-criteria decision making. We looked at border counts and nominal group technique and so on. There's a fairly broad scientific consensus about what evidence has to be like in order to serve as evidence of causation. And I'll give you a statement of it here. It's not a perfect statement, but it's pretty typical of the sort of thing that is said. So the first thing is about time order, temporal precedence, it's sometimes called. The cause should come before the effect. Okay, if the cause comes in time after the effect, then it can't be a cause. And I know there's debate in quantum physics about retrocausality and so on, but I think that's not really in the domain that we're interested in. The second thing is there needs to be a clear association. It's often expressed as a strong correlation between the cause and the effect. Now, if we use the word correlation here, we use it in the way that I've used the lowercase c correlation during the course, which is not to be specifically talking about Pearson's correlation coefficient. But I must say, a lot of people who talk about causation and that's what they have in their mind. But actually, there are quite a few other ways of showing association, and we have covered some of the more common ones in the course. And I'll talk a bit more about those in the next video. The third thing is alternative explanations for the perceived association between the cause and effect should be accounted for. And this is sometimes stated as confounding variables should be controlled for. This is a big issue with causation. So what this means is before you can say that A causes B, you need to show that there's not something else that's causing B and that there isn't something that's causing both A and B. And there's a few variations on that theme. It can get rather complicated. But what I want to do for the rest of this week's lecture, and this will spill over into next week, is, dig down into this. It's quite commonly taught with not much more than telling you this, and then usually telling you correlation is not causation. And that is not strictly, well, it's misleading, so as we will see. All right, so time order precedence, that's a pretty natural thing. It's kind of common sense. The only thing is it's not always clear which is the cause and which is the effect. So the example, I'm going to work through an example here. I'm going to be using simulated data, but it's simulated data based on what we know about a particular relationship. So there's this question that's been explored quite a bit in the management research literature about the relationship between job satisfaction and job performance. And the question you can ask is, well, does job satisfaction cause higher job performance? Or does higher job performance cause greater job satisfaction? Or is there a causal relationship in both directions? I think historically, when academics first became interested in this question, they were mainly interested in the causal relationship between job satisfaction and job performance. In other words, they wanted to explore the idea that having more satisfied workers would lead to higher job performance. This is an idea that goes back a long way. So this is an idea that Frederick Taylor, who's most famous for inventing what was known as scientific management, he's a man who's been greatly slandered over the decades, but he generally had the interests of workers at heart, or appears to have. And he had a bit to say about how he thought that making workers more satisfied in various ways, he didn't use the word satisfied, would improve their performance. He also said that he didn't have the skills and credentials to study that, and that was taken up by a little bit later, not long after the bulk of his work, by what became known as the Human Relations School in Management. So these are the people responsible for organisational behaviour, for example, and leadership studies and all that kind of thing. Largely psychologists with a few sociologists. Now, and they sort of started off looking at what they call morale, which we would these days tend to call job satisfaction, and cause and effect relationships. And the research on this is still going on, and you'll find meta-analyses and so on, not completely conclusive. So, but that's one where, it's actually, if you're trying to study it, it can be quite hard to work out what comes first, the satisfaction or the performance. It's not an area where it's very easy to do convincing experiments. You run into this problem of, external validity. You can do very artificial kinds of experiments. I think I read one where they tried to simulate increasing job satisfaction by letting people listen to music with headphones while they were working. Bit of a stretch, if you ask me. But anyway, that's an example, and you will find many of these cases where there are things we're really interested in knowing, but it's quite hard to tell what the time order precedence is. So I'll end there. and the next video I'll start talking about this idea of clear association. I need to spend quite a bit of time on that. There's not a lot of new material in it, but I want to use this as partly as a revision opportunity.